Canadian aeronautics company was working secretly on a revolutionary aircraft, a flying saucer. This was the brainchild of a visionary British aeronautical engineer.
The genius behind the flying saucer project was John Frost. He came from England as a designer on another project, but he soon became intrigued with the idea of taking flying saucers into the air.
John Frost had been responsible for one of aviation's most innovative developments, the swept-wing tailless fighter.
The inspiration behind John Frost's first ideas, in fact, came from his collecting a scrapbook of all the UFO reports that were being heralded all over the world. And through looking at every one of the reports, he began to start sifting them down to at least two possible sources. And one was man-made, and he traced it back to Germany.
Frost was intrigued by reports of the Nazi flying saucers.
In fact, we now have evidence to show that he was a participant in interviewing German scientists, and especially one, Mitha, who had worked directly with German flying saucers.
Dr. Mitha claimed that he had worked for over 10 years on the Nazi saucer program, and his team had actually built the flying prototype. Mitha showed Frost photographs, plans, and blueprints. Frost was convinced that he could turn Mitha's plans into reality.
John Frost had the promise of something that no one else could deliver at that point. A supersonic, more than twice as fast as the speed of sound aircraft that could fly higher and faster than anything else out there and never needed a runway or any airfield to operate from.
In 1952, the Canadian Avro Aircraft Factory concealed one of America's most highly classified and top-secret projects.
John Frost set up a secret group called the Special Projects Group. It was based on men just like himself, engineers and technicians and scientists that would work on his own ideas and ideas that would in fact lead to the flying saucer projects.
One of the aeronautical engineers who worked with John Frost on this revolutionary concept was David Garland.
Well, John Frost was frightfully English. You know, he was a typical English gentleman from the public school system, but with tremendous experience in the aviation industry. I'd say his enthusiasm was infectious. No problem was too big. There's a solution to every problem. In fact, we don't have problems, we have challenges. There were plenty of challenges.
John Frost's very first project is Project Y, a spade-shaped aircraft that's based around his circular pancake engine. It'll be able to take off from the ground vertically or in a rolling takeoff and fly as a supersonic interceptor.
Project Y was designed as a tailless jet engine aircraft. It was in effect using flying saucer technology. A spade-shaped mock-up was built by Frost's elite team in a heavily guarded workshop in the Avro factory. In 1953, a model with a delta-tail jet flap for vertical takeoff control was secretly tested. The failings of the design soon became apparent.
One of the main problems with any tail-sitting aircraft would be that the amount of pilot skills that would be required to fly vertically from the ground in that position, and then in fact to return, would be incredible.
John Frost now concentrated all the efforts of the Special Projects team on the development of a circular design, essentially a flying saucer.
The circle is the most efficient ground effect machine. You get more lift for a given thrust around the periphery. So it makes sense when you're hovering in ground effect.
John Frost's next design was codenamed Y2.
And Project Y2 is a completely circular aircraft, now using a rotor system in the center of it and multiple engines on the outside edge, powering that rotor, giving it vertical takeoff and eventual direction so it could fly into altitudes that no one else could guess. It was a knife-edge supersonic fighter that he was selling. And at this point, the American Air Force bought in big time with a $10 million grant towards his research.
By 1956, the Cold War space race and arms race was at its height. The American military was desperate to invest in new weapons technologies. With clandestine American funding, the development of the supersonic flying saucer began.
In the Schaefer building was a full-size 50-foot diameter 6-engine powered aircraft. Now, testing though proved that it was a dangerous beast, one that nearly killed the entire Frost team.
The test was nearly catastrophic. The engines of the saucer tethered in the hangar spun out of control and almost blew the roof of the research lab off.
John Frost decides that there's no way that he can continue this work with a complete flying saucer. Supersonic project is abandoned for the time being for him to build a smaller test vehicle that becomes the Avro car.
Well, the design specification for the Avro car was to fly at forward speed at 300 miles an hour, some modest kind of speed, but it had a high thrust-to-weight ratio greater than 1. And to fly at 30,000 feet altitude, and to land and take off vertically.
In 1957, Frost's prototype model finally rewarded the earlier American military investment in his project.
The Avro car was a scaled-down test vehicle that could do two jobs. One, it could provide a test vehicle for the supersonic craft that was still sitting in the Schaefer building. But secondly, it could be the flying jeep that the U.S. Army required. With weaponry, it could actually go on the battlefield as a battlefield weapon.
In 1959, the two vertical takeoff prototypes rolled out of the factory. The long-term aim was to produce a flying saucer that could reach over 1,500 miles per hour.
It did fly along the runways, de-icing the runways quite nicely, blowing ice and snow around. And it got into trouble over freshly mown part of the airfield when all the grass blew up and came back down in the intakes. And we started thinking about how to prevent what's called foreign object ingestion into the intakes.
The flying saucer flew several test flights, but its shape meant that it was incredibly difficult to steer.
It was a maze of challenges.